And this is the third of these studios. They're every 2 months. The first focused on teachers facing the digital divide. The second, artificial intelligence, human rights, and ethics. And today's studio is on women in technology. So the issue of access to technology is recognized in SDG 5 on gender equality. SDG 5B in particular talks about, it says, enhance the use of enabling technology, in particular information and communications technology, to promote the empowerment of women. Behind this SDG are there some significant challenges and impacts that have only been made worse by COVID, as with many other things that we're experiencing. The more that we're relying on the internet to navigate around lockdowns for work, education, healthcare, social lives, and entertainment, the greater the impact of the gender digital divide, as women and girls are cut off from many of these experiences and necessities in our current lives. However, the issue of women in technology goes well beyond access to the internet. Carly Fiorina, the former CEO of Hewlett Packard, said that human potential is the only limitless resource we have in this world. And given the power of ICTs, the digital gender divide limits that human potential, perhaps particularly in developing countries where ICTs allow leapfrogging over traditional barriers. In this session, we want to focus on the issue of women in technology. We want to highlight that this gender gap has significant impacts on individuals, societies, and economies, and identify practical and realistic solutions to close this divide as quickly as possible. And here to help us do that, I'm very pleased to welcome Doreen Bogdan-Martin, the Director of the Telecommunication Development Bureau at the International Telecommunication Union, the ITU. Isabel Collet, the founder of the Research Association for Gender in Education and Training, the director of the Gender and Intersectional Relations Research Group in Education, and associated professor at the Institute of Gender Studies at the University of Geneva. And finally, Roland White, the global director of diversity and inclusion at Microsoft. What I was wondering if you could first just please introduce yourselves and your roles and examples of these issues and challenges. And as we think about the size of the gap, it would be great if you could also maybe highlight with any personal stories, that you might be willing to share about the very real impact of the gaps on yourselves, your friends and family, your colleagues, and others in the community. Doreen, maybe if you'd like to go first, please.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Michael, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. It's great to be here. I mean, Michael, maybe first to say how timely this discussion is, coming very soon after the celebrations last week on the 11th of February on the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. And of course, also coming before the 8th of March, where we're going to have International Women's Day. And I must say, last week, I was really struck by the global attention on social media, in particular around the whole women and girls in science and the lack thereof. So I think it's really timely that we're having this discussion today. And of course, in terms of my work, so I lead the, excuse me, because I'm very hoarse today after a chilly Geneva weekend. In terms of my work, I lead the development arm of the ITU. So I oversee our operations in country. And of course, our mission is all about connecting the unconnected. And we know that there's 3.7 billion people out there that are not connected. And within that connectivity gap, there is this persistent digital gender divide. And our new global figures that were released just before the end of last year show that the proportion of women using the internet stands at around 48%, compared to 55% of men. And I would say sort of overall, kind of in every region in the world, men are more online than women. But I would say there is some positive news coming out of some regions. The Americas region, for example, we are kind of getting there in terms of gender parity in the digital space. And the gap has also been shrinking in Europe as well as in the CIS. But there is some cause for concern elsewhere with the Arab states, Asia and the Pacific, and especially Africa, where we see the gap is actually widening. And in the ITU, we actually started to calculate the digital gender parity score. So in terms of internet access, on a scale where total parity equals 1, right now we're at about 0.87. So that really leaves quite a long way to go. But I think it's also important to look within, because that figure actually hides, I would say, the bitter reality for an overwhelming number of women, particularly in poorer nations. Because while the gender gap is smaller in developed countries, it is much larger in developing ones, especially in the world's least developed countries. And if we look, Michael, at the least developed countries, there's only 1 in 7 women using the internet, compared to 1 in 4 in other developing countries. So that LDC space is one where we really need to pay attention, as well as the developing countries overall. And then, of course, when we look at mobile access, and I refer here to the GSMA data that was released at the end of last year, we still have over 300 million fewer women that are accessing the internet via a mobile than men, with women 20% less likely to open a smartphone, to own a smartphone. And there's been improvement in lower and middle income economies, but there is still huge gender gaps, up to like 51% in South Asia in terms of women's mobile internet access. And so that was just a bit on the numbers. And I want to turn briefly to the sort of why this is important. I mean, I think everyone knows why it's important, but empowering women and girls to access the internet and to acquire the skills to use digital technologies really provides, and Michael, you said before, you were talking about human potential. Well, it really opens up the world of new opportunities to find work, to start businesses, to sell products to new markets. But beyond these economic advantages, being online also allows women and girls to explore new educational opportunities, to access healthcare, obtain even confidential medical information, and to take advantage of things like digital financial services. It's so important. And really, the internet can be the most powerful tool for personal empowerment that the world has ever seen. And what we also know is that when women and girls are empowered through digital technologies, their families benefit, their communities benefit, and national economies benefit as well. It has been estimated that bringing an additional 600 million women and girls online could boost global GDP by as much as $18 billion. And so that's an important number. I also wanted Michael to touch on, of course, the COVID factor, because I think this discussion also has to be taken in the context of the global pandemic that is unfortunately still with us. What we have seen in this pandemic is that women are suffering disproportionately. They are more likely to have lost their jobs. They're more likely to have been thrown into financial precarity. We have also seen long-term educational prospects compromised. And what we saw in a report from the Malala Foundation, they warned that as many as 20 million girls may never return to school following the wave of classroom closures. So, we really need to be finding effective ways to empower women and girls through digital access now. I mean, I really think that COVID has put a new urgency on this issue. So if there's ever been a time to close the digital divide, and of course within it, the digital gender divide, I think the time is really now. Michael, you asked for maybe anecdotes. So I've been working in this sector for more than 30 years. I started my career as an intern in the US Department of Commerce and later became a paid employee. And of course, the sector has always been largely male dominated, but there are many more women that are taking up careers in this sector. So I would say I'm very encouraged. And what I think gratifies me the most is when I see the impact of the work that we do in exposing opportunities to careers in the digital sector, and the takeaways that young girls have. It really makes it all worthwhile. And I refer to some of the work we've done in Africa with our African Girls Can Code, and speaking with those girls and coming back to them a year after they've done their coding and hearing their stories of how it's changed their lives, it's changed their families. We know that digital has an impact on every sector of the economic activities of the world, and really seeing how young girls can embrace this and then start to chart their own careers and prospects is something that excites me and makes me more determined to do everything we can to close the digital gender gap. Thank you.
Thank you, Doreen. Those are certainly some sobering numbers. 1 in 7 in LDCs, and some of those numbers are really quite sobering. And also, it's nice to have a note of optimism from having observed the impact of some of these programs. And we'll come back to some of the programs and ways that the divide can be closed. But first, now let's Isabel, if you had a few observations on the divide and what you're seeing, that'd be great. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your invitation, and good afternoon to everybody. So I am a professor of education at the University of Geneva, but at first I used to be a computer scientist. I had a bachelor degree in digital image processing. I graduated in the 90s, and at that time, I didn't find work in IT. And it was probably the only time in France where there were unemployment in IT. And then because I was a young married woman without children, my future employers were convinced that I was going to make quantities of children. I was going to take care exclusively. And they are not really eager to hire me. So after 6 years trying to work in IT, I quit and I became a sociologist. And now I'm a very happy sociologist. But I could have been a very happy computer scientist. I didn't leave IT because of lack of interest. I quit IT because I found nobody, no society, no supervisor who have confidence in my skill, and myself, I didn't have much confidence, therefore, in my skills. Now I've been working for 20 years on gender and IT and how to close the gender gap, and obviously I'm still working on it, so I didn't succeed in closing the gender gap either. 20 years ago, when I did my PhD, in fact, no one cared about this topic. When I met deans of computer science faculties, for example, during my PhD, they told me, well, I wish there were more women in IT, of course, but we must be lucid. They don't like it. They don't want to come. We will not force them. After all, it's their fault. IT is open to everybody, so if they want to come, they can come. With such a discourse, of course, we can go very far on the path of equality. And 15 years later, that is about 5 years ago, I realized we finally have a very, very important shift in the opinion. I met the president of the Academy of Society of Computer Science in France, and he said, IT must perform some kind of discrimination against women because there is no good reason they cannot come study it. There is no pink brain or blue brain. So if women don't want to come, it's probably because we can't attract them. And I am really very happy to see that both the scientific community and the industry are today concerned by closing the gender gap and not by saying it's women's fault. So why is it still an issue? Why the sector is still so male-dominated? There are two common and naive explanations about the gender gap. The first one is about the nerdy image of the sector. That's true. IT suffers from a nerdy image which discourages girls. And sometimes we say nerds don't like girls, they are ill at ease with girls and refuse to recognize their value. Maybe, but this explanation does not stand up when we consider the position of the nerds or of the geeks in the tech. Geeks, nerds are not the top profiles in the company are looking for. They are reputed to be too specialized, unable to work in a team, even if they are great programmers. It's difficult to blame this few population of nerds of the exclusion of women. For the moment, they do not run the IT business. So another explanation is about self-censorship. Girls would be scared by science. They would be afraid of not succeeding. They would not be daring enough. And finally, they would censor themselves because they don't believe in their own capabilities and skill. And in fact, I can take it for myself. At a point, I quit IT because I didn't believe in myself. But why do girls lack of self-confidence? It's not an innate feeling for girls. There is a significant number of signals throughout childhood and even throughout life which remind girls that their place is not in the scientific and technical profession. There are science activities centered on socially masculine concern, stereotypes, gender stereotypes, especially in games and toys, gender expectation from parents and teachers, a lack of role models, sexism, harassment in workplace or at school. And when you look at the workplace, we see an uneven distribution of budget, scholarship, full-time, permanent job, responsibility, supervision. So at the end, yes, women end up wondering if they are able to take a place in IT or if it is a waste of time. Maybe it will be more profitable for them to invest other areas where their skills are be more readily, more spontaneously recognized. So, of course, we need to tackle this social censorship first. We need to encourage women. We need to work on empowerment. But if we can stop this social censorship, we don't need anymore to encourage women. The problem is not fixing women, but fixing the system. Women can have interesting position in tech industry, but moreover, IT and science need women, and that is the new angle we have to work on to tackle this gender gap.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that personal history and how the attitudes are beginning to shift and the remaining challenges. If I can share a little of my own anecdote, I have 3 daughters in schools here in Geneva, and I haven't felt that they're being discouraged from taking maths and sciences, so I find that encouraging, but that's in Geneva and clearly not all over the world yet. Roland, if you'd like to introduce your thoughts on the topic, please.
Thank you, Michael. Yes. So hello, my name is Roland White, he, him, his. I am the Global Director for Diversity Inclusion in Microsoft, looking after diversity inclusion in all of the countries that we operate in outside of the US, so over 190 countries. I think I'll give a little bit of a background about why this is so important for us in Microsoft, that our vision in Microsoft, led by Satya, is to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. So when you think about it, of over like 7.8 billion people on the planet, they are a lot of people, and all of their backgrounds, as we heard slightly earlier, are totally different. Their social economic backgrounds, their access to even some of the basic things that we take for granted, like running water and hygiene and medicine, etc. So it's critical for us to think about what we can do as an organization to be able to make the world a better place and help others to help others. And so when we think about diversity and inclusion in Microsoft, it covers 4 key quadrants. All where gender kind of plays out, and you'll see that as kind of we unpick this. So first of all, it's around our products and services. How do we make our products and services truly useful, truly inclusive for everybody who wants to use them, whether we're talking gender, orientation, ability, culture, nationality, the list goes on. But with those products and services, we need to make sure that we're designing them to be truly useful, dependent on where you live, what the environments you live in, and how you operate in. And so that is critical as we kind of think about our work in this space, that we know, even just as basic, the buying power of women, before you even start, is over 50% of the population. There are more women than men on this planet. And so unless we start thinking about it a little bit more strategically, we'll continue to design things in the eyes of the designers and not necessarily in the eyes of the consumers. The second part of this is our customers and supply chain. And what's really interesting when we look at this, especially as Microsoft touches many people and many organizations around the world, the challenge that many organizations have on this topic specifically, both the gender divide gap and also the wider gap in diversity in organizations. So the more that we can work as an organization to help influence that change at a systemic level, literally from school through to career, through to the culture in countries, will help not only influence our supply chain, but also our customers and the customers of our customers. The third part is about our workforce, and our workforce is literally around the world. But we know that there is a critical shortage of skills in our workforce. I mean, there's lots of figures out there, but things like, I know a reasoning report at the weekend, that something nearly like 500,000 highly skilled workers are going to be needed to fill the digital roles by 2022. Yet that's 3 times the number of people that graduated in UK computer science degrees in the last 10 years. And what's even worse is only 5% of those were female. So we need to really think about actually what does this mean? And to Isabel's point is, how do we make some of this stuff more accessible and I'm going to use my term more sexy, as it were, to appeal to different people and to break down some of those stereotypes that exist. And then our last part is around corporate social responsibility. So the work that we do with society to try and break down some of those stigmas. So like, for example, in the Middle East, working to ensure that actually women can come into a Microsoft office and work equally with men and have a place around the table. If they choose culturally that they wish to sit in a different office and a different round table, that's their choice. But we actually want to break down some of those stigmas, through to actually working with some of our customers in Africa, for example, to give greater access to internet and internet-based technologies to enable new businesses to start, to able to influence the ecosystem. So the whole topic of women in technology and the access of technology in the internet by different gender demographics is critical to us. We know that this starts on day one. We know that this starts from all the research of around 6 years old, when people start seeing the stereotypes in society about what is it that a woman can do, what is it that a man can do. And even some of those micro messages in TV programs, in the journal, in shops, etc., about you still get the Barbies that do, like the Barbie dolls that do the cooking or the fashion or the driving in nice cars with Ken, yet you still get the male things that do the technology and become the doctors and become. So all of this needs to change, and all of us have an accountability in every single thing we do to change this. So I know we're going to be talking later about some of the activities, but I also want to give one more teaser. Satya Nadella said about 6 months ago that COVID was obviously something that impacted us around the world in a very negative way. But out of every single thing that becomes negative is a massive positive. What we are seeing by COVID is that industries and companies around the world are proving that they can operate differently, They are proving that talent no longer needs to come into a workplace. They're proving that talent can work over machines and be flexible. So if this doesn't give us a moment in time to think differently about what talent comes into the workplace and how people work and the future of work changing, then we're really going to be missing a trick. And this is where I really think passionately about kind of, this is an opportunity for us to break down this gender divide, especially in the workplace and especially in the future, because it enables more people to do work from where they're based and they don't have to be in the key locations.
Thank you. So we'll get back to that. I see already a question to you, Roland, that we'll get to in a moment about this topic in the Q&A. And if anyone else has any questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat or the Q&A. I just wanted to kind of formalize something that we've been talking about a little bit here, and that is that closing the gender digital divide is just the first step. But it's not just about access to be able to consume content and services, as important as that is in all of our lives, but it's also technical training to be able to develop and manage those services, and also business training to develop companies that develop new services. And sometimes this is known as the digital skills pyramid, that you have digital user skills at the bottom, specialist skills above, and then e-business skills. And that closing this gender digital divide is not just about SDG 5, gender equality, but it's also SDG 8, decent work, creating jobs. And it's also about SDG 9, fostering innovation. And finally, just one other thought, that as women in technology move up this pyramid and start creating companies and creating new services, those might be targeted, those new services might be targeted to fill gaps in the market for relevant content and services that are focused more on women, that will bring more women online, create more demand, and hopefully create a virtuous cycle of growth. So with that, if I could ask each of you to identify one or two programs or initiatives that aim at one of these levels of the pyramid, to try and bring women online, women and girls online, to bring them into the workforce, and ultimately to be able to create new innovative companies. Doreen, maybe we'll start with you, please.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I mean, I like the way that you've outlined the pyramid, and I'm pleased that we're working in all three of these spaces. And we do have a number of initiatives, and maybe if I could start first with Equals. Equals is the global partnership to bridge the digital gender divide. It was created in 2016. We worked together with UN Women, ITC, GSMA, and the UN University. And when we set up the partnership, we wanted to hit on those sort of three key, as we call them, pain points. And as you just said, Michael, it's not just about access to technology. It's not just about the digital access gap. If we're going to make a difference, we have to hit women's access, women's digital skills, and women's digital leadership and entrepreneurship opportunities. So Equals, so far, we have 100 committed partners. We have governments, the private sector, civil society, and we have 115 countries that we're working in. We deliver digital skills training. We do mentoring. So far, we've done that for over 50,000 girls and women. We have 146 research projects that are underway, focusing on the barriers to closing the digital gender gap and also looking at potential solutions. We have also this ongoing training project that is linked directly to the e-skills pyramid. We have teamed up with EY, GSMA, and some others where we're also focusing on digital skills training. So really focused on that bottom piece to make sure that we get that basic digital skills training out there. And then we'll also move up the pyramid with the top piece, focusing on the business side, entrepreneurship opportunities, and helping women with their businesses. If I could also just quickly add, link to that, we have our Girls Can Code efforts that I mentioned before, coding camps in the Americas region, in Africa. We have digital transformation centers that we have been setting up in 11 countries. That's for boys and girls, focused on that basic digital skills market. And we also have a new project focused on LDCs, on Haiti, Burundi, and we also have Ethiopia, where we're focused on enhancing women's economic opportunities, working in the agriculture sector, in the textile industry. And that's an exciting new project that we're doing with the Enhanced Integrated Framework. Again, it's very much linked to our work with Equals. So perhaps I'll stop there. Lots of examples that I could share, but I just wanted to highlight a few. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot. Isabel?
Everything Doreen presents are really great and very useful, and that it's probably a large part of the solution. And I will propose something more disappointing, but quickly efficient. It's quotas. And quotas work as well for university and for industry. Usually people do not like quota because they are afraid of hiring less competent people, or maybe people who don't really deserve it. But what we have to realize is that there is many pitfalls along the road for women, and introducing a quota means acknowledging it's harder for women to get the same place, the same job. So, and if you consider women's grade in high school or in university, they are as good, if not better sometimes, than men's grade, especially in science, not really in mathematics, but usually in science. Moreover, women are very efficient as they have to pass so many obstacles. So, of course, quota, it's a kind of, it's a way to recognize we fail, but it's efficient and quickly efficient. They are cheap and they work. And of course, we can fight stereotype, but it's not enough. Because people think usually that stereotype should produce discrimination, but it's the other way around. Discrimination produces stereotype. The problem with stereotype that they are constantly evolving. We keep building new stereotype to prove ourselves there is no discrimination. We must destroy discrimination and fix the system because stereotype will vanish, because we won't need them anymore to prove that it's nature. We think it's because of the nature of men and women that we have such a society. But if we change radically the gender divide, we don't need this stereotype. It proves that they are useless. So, for example, with quota, but it's not, of course, the only solution, you quickly prove that it works with men, with women, with equality.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you. And lastly, Roland, if you had a few thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the things that at Microsoft we believe in is to try and use our brand to try and create social change. And as we know, many parents love and loathe this at the same time. Computer games, as well, the internet does have different influencing powers for those people that have access to it. So purposely, we are ensuring that our work, both on the internet, but also through our game system on Xbox, is using characters to break down some of these stereotypes. So we have a lot more female leads in technical areas. And not just the middle, kind of like the generalized female leads of typically the majority set, but also a lot more minority characters, because this is the other part we're not talking about yet, but it's the intersectionality component of this. And it does cause a greater risk to us as we move forward at this at scale. But the second part tying to that intersectionality is breaking down some of those wider stereotypes, because we also know, based on research, that women are a lot more values-led than men. And so if they feel that they're being treated like a tick box, a metric, they are not going to be as comfortable in an organization versus if they feel that actually that organization is truly valuing inclusion when you look across the complexity of diversity. So for example, also in our Xbox games, we've launched the first ever transgender character as a lead character to try and break down some of those stigmas. But also then in our global coding game, Minecraft, Not only the majority of characters are gender neutral, but there's also learning capability now there to understand some of the societal stereotypes and stigmas and oppression that has gone on for different demographics around the world. So hopefully we're going to start influencing kind of at the earlier stage to start make that influence. But in parallel, similar to Doreen, we run global coding events in schools tied to Minecraft, but something called DigiCode. And that's available for girls around the world through our Microsoft sites, and also underrepresented minority groups, depending on the different countries. But then this builds into the challenge that we have of the early in career set, because we still know we have that challenge in that space. And I agree with Isabel that unless you kind of measure things, you will never actually drive that change. But in early careers, we want to make sure that people realize that careers in technology are actually not what people think they are. They're not nerdy anymore. They're not that type of people walking around in sandals and shorts and things like that. And so one of the things purposely we're doing in an organization is the power of storytelling, and ensuring that through our social sites and through our websites, we are showing the stories of people that have been successful throughout different stages of their careers, and why technology is an important piece, and why diversity really adds to that part. But the last thing, which is for me super important, is that we know, going back very much to Doreen's original start on this call, that different people have access to skills and training and technology. And this is a worry to us, because typically we know that the social divide around the world is getting greater. And so one of the things that Microsoft has been adamant about is to try and get greater access for training and self-development and career development for people around the world, which is why we have launched over the last 3 years our global skilling event through GitHub, LinkedIn, and Microsoft Live, to enable women to come and upskill themselves through the use of technology at no cost, to be able to go towards some of these jobs like data scientists, analysts, developers, and engineers. Because we also know specifically our jobs aren't going to exist in the next 10 years. It's all about skills agility. And if we are able to train ourselves to evolve, then we will have the jobs of the future. So why not enable different people at different stages of their lives around the world? If we can give them access to technology, we can give them the access to the training. This will enable them to enter the workplace at different levels and times, and hopefully help us solve this problem that some people are saying is going to take over 100 years to fix. But I want to see it fixed a lot more in my lifetime.
Great, thank you. Very interesting perspective. And before I turn to the questions that are starting to come in, I just wondered if anyone wanted to share any reflections on the topics or issues raised by each other, or fill in some more blanks, and then we'll turn to some of the questions. So did anyone want to have any further comments? Doreen?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I mean, just a couple of thoughts, because the points, Isabel mentioned some of the points in Roland as well about the perception challenges in this space, about the need for more role models. I like the point about the importance of storytelling, and looking more at how we're sort of delivering the messages. And I think that in terms of delivering the messages, we have to adapt ourselves to the audience that we're trying to get to. And I'd say one of, perhaps on my side, the pluses of COVID, sometimes the pluses, was having all of my children at home doing their classes online, and having regular family dinners where we shared our day, and I was sharing a lot about what I was doing. And of course, just after everyone came home, we were preparing for Girls in ICT Day, which takes place on the fourth month, the fourth Thursday of the fourth month. So it was in April. And as I was preparing for that event and getting feedback from my kids, the first thing my kids said was, well, how can you have a panel like that when you're all old people? If you want to relate to girls, you need to have some younger people with you. And in the end, I ended up co-moderating the session with my teenage daughter at the time. And then they also jumped in and had much to say about my social media presence, about how I was tweeting, and just listening to young people and being able to reach their kind of what they're looking for, I think is so important. And I also just wanted to highlight Girls in ICT Day. We're celebrating our 10-year anniversary this year. It will take place on the 22nd of April. And it's all about exposing careers in the ICT sector, the importance of girls in STEM. So I would invite anyone that's interested, if you want to join us and do an event or just get involved in the advocacy part, we would certainly welcome that. So I'll stop there, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's a good reflection. My daughters tease me for still using email and for actually addressing people, dear whoever, but that's some old-fashioned relic. Anyway, Isabella Rowland, did you have any thoughts? And then I'll turn to the questions.
Isabel, after you.
Maybe a small thing about role model, because usually we speak a lot about role models. We need more role models. I totally agree. We need more storytelling. It's very important. And about role models, it's difficult to have. Well, there is no scientific results that prove that role models are effective alone, work alone. In the midst of several affirmative action, it's a different thing. But alone, they don't have a very strong effect. Role models usually might help and encourage women who are already thinking about IT. And it's very important to encourage women who are already thinking about IT, because, as I said, there is many pitfalls on the street. But it will not create the desire of going in IT or to become a computer scientist. That's why we have to come back to storytelling, because with storytelling you can give the desire to discover IT. But role model, you can't compare yourself to an IT role model if you even don't think about going to IT.
Great. Thank you for that reflection. Roland?
Yeah, I just think a couple of things. I mean, in a respectful way, I think I will agree to disagree on the role model versus storytelling. There is a lot of research in organizations around you cannot be what you cannot see. And although I'm mixed on that, then you do need visible indicators. And we know that from people applying to organizations. One of the first things they do is look at the boards and look to see actually what sort of representation do they have and how diverse are they before they even start. So that there's a blend between this. None of this is a silver or golden bullet on its own, but it really does have to be a blend because people have to feel emotionally attached to this. I think the only other thing, I just want to go a little bit more deeper on the intersectionality part of this, because this worries me a lot. The fact of, we have been talking about the topic of the gender divide for a long time, yet we are not making as much progress as we could do. And one of the reasons why we're doing this, in my opinion, is the fact of we too are creating our own silos and our stereotypes. And unless we start to actually widen our frame of reference, when we're talking about in any country, for example, the access to training for different people of minority groups in that country, the access to technology for disabled people versus able people, this is all critical in where our journey goes, because not only do we need to think about the intersectionality of the female population, but also think about when they come into organizations, what their needs are. Because we know, again, the research changes, your identity changes throughout your lifetime. You have critical moments that actually drive inclusion or exclusion. And so unless organizations proactively think about what are the needs and how do we create that culture of psychological safety where women can actually feel that they are part of this organization but have the flex to do what they need, then we will not be successful. And that's why the whole agility space as we move further forward is critical, and work agility, but also thinking about how do we actually flex as society and break down some of these stereotypes as we move forward. And that's the only thing I kind of wanted to share, just to kind of hope to shake up a little bit of conversation, as it were, in this space.
Great. Well, yeah, thank you. that's an interesting addition to the discussion, the intersectionality. Just wanted to go to some of the questions. There's a fair number now, so if we can maybe just go through these. Sylvia from the NGO Committee on Aging has a question for Doreen. Does the Equals Partnership include older women in its research and activities? Older women are amongst the most excluded in the digital world, and this needs to change. Older women are as capable to learn new tools if given the opportunity as younger women.
Yeah, well, thank you, Sylvia, for the question. It's a great question and a great point. And indeed, Equals does cover this. I put the link in the chat to the Equals Partnership. I can't tell you how many of the 146 ongoing research projects cover that, but if you would like, I'm happy to take with you offline more details on which pieces of the research work tap into the older women population, which is absolutely, as you rightly said, critical.
Great, thanks. Another question, the opposite end of the age spectrum. We do need to hear from the youth, particularly women. We need effective platforms to give them a space to share their ideas. Are there such platforms to achieve this? It should not be women talking to women, but a mixed group of men and women to achieve real paradigm change. From Lilia. Anyone?
Yes, so I love this. I think it's critical. And I even want to think it as, I mean, I'm just going to be, again, a little bit pushy. We now have 5 generations of women in the workplace and 5 generations of men in the workplace as well. So this is becoming really interesting on the requirements and needs of different people. And so to your point, yes, I mean, we, as an organization, we try and do a lot of work with universities and schools and colleges, as well as early in careers, just to have roundtable listenings. And you're right, the worst thing we can do is have women talking to women, because that won't change the allyship component. Mm-hmm. But if we have women talking to men and women, that becomes really, really interesting, especially breaking down some of the perceived stereotypes, but also opening up those areas of bias where we need to work for. So I think, yes, definitely. And I really encourage so there's a piece of work that I love, Carol Dweck's work around growth mindset. And one of the things as a male ally in this space, I struggle when people come to me and just say, this is the problem, this is the problem, this is the problem. If people can use their social presence to show what might be a better way of doing things, how can we consider doing things differently, you can reach so much voice. And so all of us now have a social presence. Mine's probably slightly limited than it should be, because my son also tells me off, but it's kind of a case of just give some coaching. You are the best people that know what walking your own shoes is like, but give that coaching. And if you have the followings, people will start listening.
Great, thanks. And Isabel, do you want to just build a little bit on what you just dropped into the chat about it shouldn't just be women talking to women, but a mixed group, and then the role that men can play in all of this, from your perspective?
It's very important if we engage men in the action, because we all know it's going to be a world full of men. When a girl says, I want to do IT studies, usually we told them, well, you know, you will be only one amongst many, many men, many boys. And it's very important to see that men are equally engaged in this kind of affirmative action, because first it proves that men can have confidence in women's skills, and then they will welcome women. And it's not a problem to be, usually for women, it's not a problem to be rare between many males. But sometimes they say it's not a problem for me, but why is it a problem for them? Why is it a problem for them to see women gaining power and position between their companies? So if we engage men who love equality, and who like to empower women, it's a proof for girls and women that they are not alone to fight for their equality.
Michael, can I maybe jump into that?
Please, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree that this should not be a discussion of women just talking to women, and it's got to be men and women together. In my career, I've had a number of incredible male mentors, and I'm very grateful for that. And of course, my father was a huge mentor in my life as well. But I wanted to also link that to a point that Isabel made before about quotas. And in the ITU, we don't have a quota system, but we did something else that actually helped move the needle. And because when you can actually measure something and you show the numbers, then change starts to happen. And we created something called the gender dashboard. And we started to actually measure how many women were coming to meetings, how many women were on delegations, how many women were chairing committees. And then we would sort of award or announce at the end of a meeting, you know, the delegation that had the largest number of women. And so just by going through this process, we started to bring attention to the issue. Then we went slightly further and we looked at speaking time, because what we understood was that women were coming to meetings, but they weren't actually taking the microphone. And so we started to look at this and analyze, you know, why was this happening? And so working with the Gina Davis Institute at the time, who had started this research linked to films and women's speaking time in films, we started to look at our own meetings and how many times women were taking the microphone. And then we went even further. What issues were they intervening on? Was it just an HR issue, or were they taking the floor on cybersecurity? So it's something that we've been kind of playing around with, but very interesting. And I hope that we can continue that kind of research, because by showing those numbers, you can move the needle, because it's like something that we're not seeing, but it's there. And I think that can really drive change and difference. Thank you.
Great.
Oh, sorry, Michael.
Thanks. I have two related questions here, and then we'll have to wrap up. One about, both about platforms. One saying we do need to hear from the youth. We need effective platforms to give them a space to share their ideas. Are there such platforms? And then another, we've been talking about this for a long time, but there's little to no expertise sharing among stakeholders, which does not allow much space for collaboration. So maybe if you could point to some material that your organizations have created or elsewhere where there are platforms for this collaboration, because it is, I think, important to see what others are doing, and that especially if you're in a country where only 1 out of 7 are women are online in LDC, that you have support and encouragement and role models or mentors or whatever you want to call it. So if you just could share a few platforms also in the link, if we don't have time. Roland, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, I have to admit, in the quite a few years I've been working in this profession now, we are making progress. We're not making as much progress, but we are making progress. And one of the things, tied to Doreen's point, that is helping us make this progress is the accessibility of data and the ability to use data and data analytics to drive behaviors. So, for example, in Microsoft, one of the things we now track is looking at data points from everything from job application to job attraction to the pipeline of shortlists for interviews, for interview, for hire, for promotion, etc., even through to performance. And why that is critical is because the use of data now in organizations is helping people to look at where bias plays out in that life cycle and to start to pinpoint the change and be a lot more vocal about the change. But the answer to this is, I do see over the last few years an increased level of sharing across organizations. One of the things that we decided in Microsoft to do as of 2 years ago was to be, number one, a lot more accountable for what we are talking about in our organization, both internally and externally. So now every single year we publish an annual report on our progress around diversity and inclusion and also our learnings. Not as any sort of level of expert, we are literally just trying to share this within the industry, but also at the same time make more things accessible for other people to share and learn upon. So for example, we now publish and share free of charge unconscious bias training and training around privilege and covering and gremlins, etc. all of this to try and make society better when we're talking about this space, but then also collaborate with different CHROs. We had a global CHRO meeting last year and brought together many, many people to talk about the topic of workforce representation, culture, diversity, inclusion, and even bringing it up to some of the discussions, for example, at Davos, talking about the importance of this, especially tied to well-being and mental health. So I do see the conversation growing. I do agree we need to have more of it, but not more of the problem state, more of the solution state. This is what's working for us and how we can kind of move this further forward.
Great. Doreen? You're on mute. You're on mute.
Sorry. I could not mute myself. I mean, I think in terms of platforms, I mean, the WSIS always is a good platform for sharing. I would also offer Equals, and I put the link for Equals. I would also like to mention the generation equality effort that was supposed to all take place last year, but because of COVID is continuing this year. So that was created to be linked to the celebration of the anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action. And under this Generation Equality Initiative, which is led by UN Women, there's a technology and innovation coalition that the ITU and UNICEF are leading. And so if colleagues are interested, that's also in our plans for the rollout of that piece this year, an opportunity to share experiences and, you know, share ideas and things that could potentially be scaled.
Great, thanks. And Isabel? If you had any.
I'd like to answer to a question I saw in the Q&A.
Okay.
If I may. It's something about something else, that cultural explanation to the gender gap. And there is a cultural explanation, but you have to mix it with the question of power. There is a relation between the number of men in a field and the power you can get in the field. The most valuable the field of knowledge becomes in the social world, the more masculinized it becomes. And conversely, the more it loses value in the social world, the more it becomes feminized. You can see it in the medical and educational field. So it's why I believe in quota, even if I think it's disappointing, because it's a question of power, of taking a position of power. So it's quite difficult to admit that you have to share power when you have to fight really hard to gain such position. So there are cultural explanations, but there are also a question of sharing knowledge, but sharing knowledge is sharing power.
Thank you. We're basically at the top of the hour, so I wanted to ask for maybe one kind of short tweet worth of thoughts on answering the question that someone raised about that we've been talking about this for a long time. How can we solve this? If there was just one kind of positive message in 288 characters or less that you could share with us to close this off, that would be great. Doreen?
Okay. The time to act is now. Bridging the digital gender gap will unleash or unlock human potential.
Very good, thank you. Roland?
How do I follow that? Okay, literally, stop talking about we and start talking about I. What have you personally, every single person on this call, done every single week to drive a close? Because this is about cumulative action, and we wait for others to drive action, but we don't drive it ourselves. That was slightly longer, but I know what I meant by that.
Very good, thank you. Isabel?
I am very positive because when I see where I'm coming from 20 years ago, and when I hear Doreen, and when I hear Roland, I am very positive. I have nothing else to add.
Great. Well, thank you for ending us on a positive note. Just for those who joined a bit later, so again, I'm Michael Kendi. This was the third 2030 Digital Fast Track Studio that's sponsored by Microsoft, the Geneva Liaison Office of UNESCO, and the Graduate Institute. The next studios are very intriguing title, Sports, Technology, and Innovation on the 5th of April, 2021. And then the final one for this round will be the issue of data about ocean climate and biodiversity on the 7th of June. It's very hard to clap for on an online panel, but thank you very much for all of your thoughts and participation, and thanks to the audience for tuning in, and we'll hope to see you at the next one. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.